Welcome to Spotting Session, a podcast about film scores. My name is Robert Taylor, and I am one of the co-hosts. I am currently a writer on Spirit Running Free and I Love Film Scores. I'm joined tonight by three other film score enthusiasts. First, we have Cole McLeod. Why don't you say hi to everyone, sir?
Hello, everyone.
And then we have Vikram Lockenpaul. Did I pronounce it properly? I would listen to it a few times, sir.
Perfectly. Hi, this is Vikram.
And last but certainly not least, we have Luke Bunting. Say hi, Luke.
Hello, everyone.
So here's what the episode is going to look like tonight. We're going to talk about a couple of new film scores, discuss their merits, their drawbacks. Then we're going to pick out a few scores from the past, talk about why we love them, and then finally, we're going to start out on our very first Odyssey. We're going to be examining the 8 Harry Potter scores. First one tonight is, of course, going to be Sorcerer's Stone. So that said, let's jump in. First off, why don't we talk a little bit about Wonder Woman? Vikram, now you are going to tell us a little bit about Rupert Gregson-Williams' new score, correct? What did you think?
Well, I would love to, but I'm still pulling my notes up, so can we pass the conch off to someone else for a moment?
Of course we can. Cole, you're handling Tyler Bates' sequel score, Guardians of the Galaxy Volume 2, correct?
Yes.
Why don't we dig into that one?
All right. Overall, I really liked it. I thought it was a little bit of a step up from the first one, which I also liked, by the way. I thought it was just a little bit more mature sounding, orchestrated a little nicer. The first one had kind of more of a straightforward, I guess, simplistic feel to it, whereas this one I thought he took his main theme and he played with it a lot more. There was also the second family camaraderie angle that I think he actually worked in really nicely in a few different cues. As a score overall, I still don't think it has a ton of room to breathe. Other scores, just because the pop and rock songs take up such an important part in the film. So, I mean, I think you have to account for that a little bit. But overall, I thought he did a really good job of taking the first one and then improving on it.
And were there any outstanding cues you want to specifically single out as either great or just sort of subpar?
Two-time Galaxy Savers had some pretty cool stuff in it and a nice statement of the theme. Main theme at the end. The last 4 or 5 cues had some... there's a lot of choir in this score, which I like. I think it adds a bit more excitement and pathos to it. So I appreciate all that. The end of, I think it's Dad, has a really, really nice statement of that secondary theme with the choir backing it. And overall, pretty much every cue has its own merits. I mean, there's a few that are a little more background, but I think it did better in that respect than the first score. The first score had a few too many cues that were just kind of aimless, didn't do much for the villain. I think overall it's a stronger score from beginning to end.
I agree. I don't know if I'm going to remember a note of it in like a month or so, but I do like that Bates really sort of leaned into, James Horner techniques in certain cues, and Goldsmith obviously had a lot of influence there as well. The thing that you said that I think is so spot on is that the score itself doesn't quite have enough room to breathe because of all of the pop songs that are prevalent throughout the entire thing. He basically gets his hands cut off right at the beginning.
Yeah, I mean, I still think he did with what he has, but I think you have to kind of count the pop and rock songs into the narrative of the music because they play such an important part. Like, even in the film, certain songs are even talked about and lyrics referenced within the narrative of the film and play a big part in that. So, yeah, I think I think you have to cut him a little bit of slack in that sense. But even with that restriction, I think he did an admirable job of kind of upping his game for the second film.
One thing I will say,
And
that
if you were to rate it out of 5, what would it be?
I have it at 4.
Awesome.
I thought it was really good.
Yeah. I give it a solid 3.5. What about you guys?
I'd probably give it about a 3.5, maybe a soft 4. One thing that is really interesting to me is I think it's definitely overall a much better effort than the first score, but there wasn't a scene in this new film where I felt like the theme just had an epic moment to breathe and to kind of get itself into the audience's memory. I can remember the same scene when they're breaking out of the prison in the first movie, where they're doing it and all of a sudden this theme just comes out of nowhere and whacks the audience across the face. And I was kind of waiting for that because I think each movie kind of has to have that moment in order for a theme to get stuck in the audience's head and to enter the collective pop culture conscience. And just a little disappointed that it seemed like they were so intent on almost permutating the theme and changing it up and adapting it that there wasn't a moment where I just felt like it just was out there and very obvious, which is something I look for, I think, in sci-fi action especially.
Well, I think it got a bit of that in the very first cue. The opening scene of the movie, it actually does a really straightforward rendition of the main theme. That's kind of a welcome back to the universe kind of idea. But overall, I do agree. It didn't have as many moments where the theme just kind of popped out and hit you. It was more kind of worked into the score.
Yeah.
All right. Vikram, any thoughts?
Yeah. I would probably give it, like, out of 5, probably somewhere around 3 or 4, same as everyone. I haven't seen it, heard it in the context of the film yet. And off the top of my head, I can't remember much other than the main theme. But I think Robert was mentioning how it has to, like, kind of wedge in between all the songs that are placed in the film. And so just as a hypothetical, I'm wondering if Bates would have been better off if he tried to work like fragments or melodies from those songs into his score. I wonder what anyone thinks about that.
I think that's a great idea. I mean, I always wish that the Iron Man scores had implemented AC/DC's songs into the melodies. I think that implementing the music here would have been superb.
I think it's a neat idea, yeah.
Yeah, I think it could, if done well, it could work. I do wonder almost if Tyler Bates is the like composer that I would trust to do it intelligently and like nuanced enough to make it work. But yeah, I think that could have been an interesting way. Although I think it's with the first movie especially, they talked about how they didn't want the score to be a parody. They wanted it to be very separate in some ways. So there was the contrast between the fun songs, but then it's set against this actual stark, straightforward action sci-fi score. So that might be intentional that they specifically didn't want to do it.
Awesome. So Vikram, are you ready for Wonder Woman?
Yes, I am.
Perfect. As we said, this is Wonder Woman by Rupert Gregson Williams. Tell us if you liked it.
All right. Well, did I like it? Kind of. So, music's by Rupert Gregson Williams, who is the younger brother of Harry Gregson Williams. Not that well known, but his stock has been rising quite a bit in the last year or so. He worked with David Yates on Legend of Tarzan. He scored the Oscar nominee Hacksaw Ridge. And like half the composers in Hollywood today, he's a member of Hans Zimmer's production company, which has been closely involved with much of the DC Extended Universe franchise. Zimmer and Tom Holkenborg have both worked on Man of Steel and Batman v Superman. And it was in the last movie where Wonder Woman made her first appearance, and Zimmer wrote a theme for her, performed on electric cello by Tina Guo. You probably recognize it. It's been in all of the Wonder Woman marketing. I'm going to try and hum it. It's like... It's a little
Bravo.
off-key, but Thank you,
That was
Robert.
pretty good.
Thank you. And so I was curious how Gregson Williams would work that theme into his score. And so the reason I was curious is because while I like it and it's a very badass melody, I wasn't convinced that it was a good theme. Because when you think about like great superhero themes, like John Williams' Superman March or Danny Elfman's Spider-Man theme, you have a lot of pieces to that theme. You have a little intro bit, you have a rhythmic section, an A phrase, a B phrase, and then those composers, they take those different melodies and those different phrases, they put them into different tempos and perform on different instruments in different scenes to represent different emotions, and that's their way of conveying character development. And with this Wonder Woman melody, I'm going to call it a battle cry, it's really just an ostinato and the cello melody. So it makes me wonder, like, does it still work if it's not an electric cello? Does it still work if it's not at that high tempo, high energy pace? Does it still work if it needs to convey any emotion outside of awesomeness? Because if it's not really a theme, it's just a cool melody and a texture. And Gregson Williams with this score answers my questions with a kinda. He writes his own melody to represent Diana and the Amazons, which sounds like it's straight out of an early 2000s epic action movie. The only thing really missing is a wailing woman. I guess Wonder Woman's too busy saving the day to be wailing about stuff. But I digress. That's the theme.
You've got to save something for the sequel.
Say again?
You've got to save something for the sequel.
That's true, yeah. And it's this theme that does most of the heavy lifting throughout the movie. And there's this great scene about halfway through the movie. It's excellent. If you've seen it, you know which one I'm talking about. If you haven't, it starts in a trench and ends in a church. And that's the first time we hear both Gregson Williams' theme and Zimmer's battle cry. The track on the album is called No Man's Land. But there's no real interplay between the two themes in that track. Like, the only time he ever does anything interesting with the battle cry is in the cue Wonder Woman's Wrath. He shifts it into a different key. He puts his own theme on as counterpoint to like the battle cry ostinato, and then in like end credits he does a neat little breakdown of that. But otherwise he doesn't really develop the Zimmer theme at all. He does take his theme and develop it nicely throughout the whole score. But I was hoping for a little more on the other front. Overall, I'd say the score is all right. There's not a strong villain's theme, but that's pretty normal at this point. If the screenwriter's not going to make a memorable villain, why should the composer score one? And Diana has two pretty good, if incongruous, themes. The score overall, it sounds like a blend of The Last Samurai, Angels and Demons, and Pacific Rim. But that's not a terrible crop of scores to derive your ideas from, and it's a pleasant listen. It's a decent score.
When you said it's a mix of those three scores, I wish it were that exciting. Actually, I want to hear a score that has all those three. That sounds fantastic. I was bored to tears with the score. I don't know why he didn't use the Zimmer theme that you did so well previously as a note for the Amazons, and then develop it from there throughout the entire rest of the film. And overall, I mean, it was Journey to the Line again. It was all these temp tracks again. It was fine. It was certainly better than Batman versus Superman, and it was better than Man of Steel for my money, but that's not saying much. What did you guys think?
I mean, I think I've heard that he's been complaining or kind of alluding to in interviews, Rupert Gregson Williams, that he was kind of stuck with the temp track. They would not let him deviate, which would make a lot of sense. I agree with Vikram a lot. I think that his new theme is fine. The score does suffer because it's so different from that previous theme. And I think a lot, like, look, the Zimmer theme is awesome, and it's probably about the most memorable superhero theme we've had possibly in a decade. But I think it very well scores Zack Snyder's version of the character, but Patty Jenkins' version of the character does not fit that mold. There's a lot more nuance there. She's a softer person. And so what do you do with that, Matt? I understand why he went the way he did. I think that there is the ability to take the Warcry theme and use that for a template that you kind of morph and like make fit with the Wonder Woman movie that like in its final form. But yeah, like I don't know. I can't tell if he was just uninspired, if the temp track really hurt him, or what it was. But I was very disappointed, and the only time that my blood gets going at all while listening to it, to the film score, is as soon as that cello theme kicks in. Otherwise, it's a snooze fest.
Yeah, I would mostly agree with you on that. When I first listened to it, it was I was nothing but disappointed, honestly. And then seeing it in the film, giving it a couple more listens, it is decent. Like, it's competent. It fits the film. I guess I'm just defending it a little bit, because there is a little bit of interplay, and maybe this is just my hallucinating, but it feels like Gregson Williams' main theme kind of has that same opening 3 notes or so as the cello theme. So maybe it feels like he was trying to make those connections and just wasn't able to with the constraints he was given.
Cole, thoughts?
Yeah, I'm about the same place as everybody else. I had it at, I think, 3.5. I think a lot of it is solid but not remarkable. And when the cello theme comes along, it really comes alive and gets exciting for the first time. I know there is, if you dig a little deeper, there is some themes for the villains. Couldn't the top of my head, so, and that's kind of alluded to. It's kind of a problem with villain themes a lot lately. Brooding. It doesn't really. But yeah, overall, it was solid. I enjoyed it. I really liked the cue. I think it's Wrath of Wonder Woman, or Wonder Woman's Wrath, one of those two. And
that's the end title for the most part.
And yeah, it has the cello theme. It has the main theme kind of interplaying with each other, and I think that's actually a pretty enjoyable cue. But a lot of the rest of it is just kind of there and doing its job, but not really staking any kind of unique claim.
I will say it's nice just to hear a score that at least sounds like early 2000s media venture scores, even if it's 2017. That was my one thing I was saying. This is kind of not a great score for Wonder Woman, but it is nice to at least have some new music that is back to just having pleasant harmonies, easy basic action, the way that King Arthur and the like were guilty pleasures back in the day.
It's weird that you mentioned that, Luke, because I'm about to talk about a score that I feel does it way, way, way better, which is the new Pirates of the Caribbean movie. But does anyone have anything else to say about Wonder Woman before we move on? Any wrap-up thoughts?
See the movie. It's really good.
Awesome. So the score I'm going to be talking about this week is Pirates of the Caribbean, Dead Men Tell No Tales by Jeff Zanelli. Now, the movie itself was basically savaged by critics. I went to go see it. I thought it was fun. It was much better than the last two, that's for sure. I appreciated all the callbacks to previous films in the franchise. And the good thing about that is it allowed Zanelli to tap into some of the best and most iconic themes that have been developed in the Pirates franchise over the past, probably 15 years or so. Now, even though this is Zanelli's first time, quote-unquote, solo composing a Pirates score, he wrote several of the most memorable cues for the previous few scores. Now, I feel like Dead Men Tell No Tales is fun. It's super exciting. It's more complex than one would notice first, and even though it doesn't quite live up to the excellence of At World's End, which I think is one of the top 5 remote control scores ever, it's my second favorite score in the franchise. We've got some awesome new themes, 2 notable ones. We've got the villain named Salazar. It's this oily, creepy theme introduced in the second cue with some electric guitar, because of course you got to have the electric guitar, right? And it serves the entire score well. It is repeated often, and the way that it dances off of the other themes that are reprised, I think is great. Now, there's a second theme, which I think is even more memorable. However, it's barely used. It's used in the first cue, and the only other time it's used is The Brightest Star of the North before the final 3 cues. It's for a character who is new to the series called Karina. And it's a great little earworm, at least for me. Once it got in there, I walked out of the score humming, Zimmer's main theme. But then after I finished humming that, then I was humming her theme. But let's not forget, this is a Pirates of the Caribbean score, so you want action, you've got a ton of action. We've got wonderful bombastic cues like El Matador del Mar, I've Come with the Butcher Bills. Basically, the last 20 minutes of the score are wall-to-wall action in the best remote control sense. I mean this totally as a compliment. As you were alluding to earlier, I feel like this is an early 2000s style score from that company, and it just made me happy. Plus, when the theme for Orlando Bloom and Keira Knightley's characters respectively shows up late in the score, I mean, I got goosebumps. It was fantastic. Overall, this is the kind of music I find myself smiling at all the way through, and when the iconic main theme kicks in during Beyond My Beloved Horizon, I just was happy. I felt like this was a solid 4-star score, and the one thing I will say is stop at Beyond My Beloved Horizon. Do not listen to the last cue, which is some atrocious remix of the original Hans Zimmer theme. It's just bad. Bad with an exclamation point, bad with 3 exclamation points. So that said, what did you guys think of it?
Well, I'm mostly in the same boat as you. I think, especially on my first listen, I was caught off guard by how much I kind of missed this franchise and hearing new music for this franchise. The metaphor I thought of was, it's like you have this friend from college who you always have a wild time with every night you go out. And so this is like catching up with them a few years later, and you're just having a great time, just reminiscing, and it's just a delight to be back in this musical world, if that makes sense. And it sounds right, the themes are there, and it's just a delight to listen to. One theme, I'm not sure if you mentioned it, but I was quite a fan of, there's kind of a jig type melody. It shows up in Kill the Sparrow, I think is the cue it shows up in. I really enjoyed that one. That's the one that stuck with me the most outside of the previously written ones. And I also have to second, what is with these remixes? Every time there's a new Pirate score, there always seem to be lots of remixes. And I don't get who those are for.
I'm just going to throw out there, I love the remix.
If it makes you happy, that's all that matters.
I mean, it was so much fun.
I think that these, especially that first score, were such big sellers for such a diverse amount of the public, that even non-score fans, I do wonder if Disney just thinks, oh, we're making a soundtrack, we have to throw this in here because there's going to be casual people who aren't fans of film scores, and they're going to want to hear a remix. That doesn't make any sense, but I think that might be part of it. And then I think Zimmer really just enjoyed collaborating with people too. So I wouldn't be surprised if he instigated a lot of the ones on the fourth movie.
All right, Cole, Luke, any other thoughts?
I liked it. Echoing what you guys said, I really enjoyed kind of being back in this franchise. I will say, and I've been feeling this a lot recently, as much of a hard time as a lot of people give Zimmer for like self-copying and things like that, even when people are using his style and doing it well, I don't know if there's anybody else like currently working in it, or minus like John Powell and HGW, who can rival his writing of themes. Even if it's simplistic, somehow it's super catchy. And I just felt that these weren't up to par, even with his material from like the villain material from the fourth movie, just as far as memorability. That being said, I think the writing overall was top notch. But it just was a kind of another light bulb moment for me, like, oh, Hans Zimmer is actually very talented at theme writing, even if it's simplistic, and making something that's memorable and easily grasped.
Awesome. Cole?
Yeah, I mean, I really liked it. It's, like they said, it's so much fun having those themes back. And you listen to them, and there's all these themes, even in the theater. Like, watching the film, you hear those themes, and it just puts a smile on your face, because they just call back to all these things from before. I thought they were spotted well in the film. Like you mentioned, having the Will and Elizabeth theme come back at just the right time was so much fun to hear. So I thought he did a really good job. I liked his new themes as well. You know, we were talking about villain themes that you can't remember. I remember Salazar's theme. I can hum that.
Are you going to?
No, I don't think I'm going to.
Okay.
All right, so we all basically like Pirates 5. Let's talk about a score that I have a feeling is going to be a little bit more divisive. Luke, why don't you take us into the world of Alien Covenant, which was written by Jed Kurtzel?
Okay. This is the only time I ever want to revisit the world of Alien Covenant. So I guess starting back, for anybody who doesn't know, so Ridley Scott returned to this whole Alien franchise back with Prometheus, I believe in 2012 it was. And the whole idea was that he wanted to tell a creation myth. The studio wanted him to do an Alien movie, and so he just kind of combined them. So he created this movie that created Prometheus, promising to kind of pay off some of the questions that were brought in that movie with Alien Covenant. Well, he doesn't. And a lot of that identity crisis that carried over from Prometheus into Alien Covenant, where it's Alien versus the movie that Scott clearly really wants to make, which is a creation myth, extends to this score. So Jed Kurtzel is a composer who most of us know from Assassin's Creed, from Macbeth. If we've heard anything from him at all, his music tends to be very percussive, droney, and a lot of that carries over to Alien Covenant. So this is a score that, stylistically wise, isn't really bad. Everything he is doing here is pretty much what you would expect. It's a lot of eerie string and flute movements. It's a lot of droning on with synth. And that can be fine if the composer is up to the task of making it interesting. And that's kind of where Kurtzel failed in this score, in my opinion. And hurting all of that is the fact that Ridley Scott, for some reason, wanted Jerry Goldsmith's original theme from Alien to be the main theme for this film as well. Now, that anybody who knows the timeline for Alien realizes that the theme was only used once in Prometheus, realizes that that doesn't make any sense, but they go with it. And Kurtzel is forced to adapt Goldsmith's theme multiple times throughout the film, and it unfortunately eclipses everything else he's doing. That's not to say that Kurtzel doesn't have some other nice stuff that he provides throughout the score. There's a nice soft theme on piano in the cue called A Cabin on the Lake, and in the cue following that, it's kind of transferred over to brass on trumpets. And the cue is called Sails. There's a really pleasant crescendo throughout that cue, and it shows some compositional competency, actually, which is unique to just a handful of cues here. For the rest of the time, when it's not one of the three cues that has this nice soft piano or brass theme, It is pretty much a droning synth with maybe some oscillating string tones over top. It's very boring. Anybody who claimed that Mark Streitenfeld's music for Prometheus was kind of dull will only have even more to say to that regard with Kurzel's theme here. Outside of that nice piano theme, he also does create a two-note kind of manipulated synthetic sound for the alien. It's weird and distinctive, but also its creepiness factor is coming completely from the fact that he created a synth sound that's creepy, not from any sort of compositional excellence. That being said, there are definitely portions of this score that I find enjoyable or interesting. A lot of the like reuses or rearrangements of Goldsmith's theme and cues like the Covenant, Planet 4. Those themes actually are very nice, and they're good arrangements of Goldsmith's theme and gives them kind of the airing they never got in the original. And there's certainly some interesting like action music in cues like Face Hugger, where there's that flute motif that does give you something to kind of grasp onto outside of just droning. So this isn't a complete loss here. Like I said, stylistically, it's kind of what you would expect. It's just, it's disappointing because this is a composer who, even more so than the last composer in the franchise, Mark Streitenfeld, is just so out of his depth that you have a prime opportunity, a sci-fi movie with one of the best directors in the business that is being given to a composer that can't deliver when there are so many other composers who could have. So those are kind of my thoughts. I think that this is, you could argue between kind of like a 1.5, 2 stars out of 5. There are certainly cues you can take out and enjoy, but there's also the question of why would you take those cues out when there's so much better music in the similar vein to listen to.
Vikram, Cole, did either of you like this?
Well, I listened to it. I think I listened to it twice. I only remember listening to it once, though. And, you know, I thought it was all right. There were a couple of tracks that I noticed, I guess. And that was quite a while ago.
Praise.
I know. I remember thinking, okay, this is interesting. This is decent. I'll probably appreciate it after another listen, which I guess I just never got back to it. Honestly, I can't remember any of the cues at this moment. I do remember the Jerry Goldsmith's theme, which, despite its lack of use in the franchise, is still somehow become iconic. And I remember hearing the life theme that Harry Gregson Williams wrote for Prometheus at some point in the score. Other than that, I don't know, one of my friends was like praising it to high heaven, and one of my friends thought it was utter garbage. So it's interesting that it's eliciting this range of opinions, and I'm kind of in the middle, and I didn't really remember much of it. I know Luke mentioned that there are so many composers that he would have preferred, or he thinks could have done this much better. How do you think Harry Gregson Williams would have been able to do with it? Because I heard his name attached to it early on, especially following Prometheus and his contributions.
So I guess this is something I meant to mention as well. I don't know if you guys have seen the movie as well, but these things are not on the soundtrack, but they do play as kind of source music, the life theme from Harry Gregson Williams in the movie. It ends up being used as almost a theme for anything that it was associated with Prometheus, which I thought was kind of nice, but they had that thematic through line. But like, I don't know, other people can talk to if he had scored the film, but I think that's clear. His music, Ridley Scott likes working with him. He keeps going back to him. His music is some of the best that Ridley Scott has been able to get out of a composer in recent years. So I don't know why. I can't imagine that his score would have been anything other than a major step up.
I concur. And I find it hilarious that you guys are like, the most memorable parts of this score are essentially the parts taken from the previous scores. What did you think, Cole?
I thought it was just right middle of the road. I thought it was solid. I liked the kind of sweeping string writing and the Goldsmith references in the first third of the score, and I thought there was some decent kind of dark, violent music in the second half. The middle, there's a lot of just, it's kind of there, it's unnerving, and does some jump scares. Overall, I think it works. I think it has some good. I think it pales a little bit in comparison to some of the scores the franchise has had in the past. So personally, I'm kind of hoping that the franchise keeps up its role of replacing a composer every movie, just to see what someone else is going to do with it. Wasn't terrible, but it's not amazing either.
And I'll wrap things up by saying that I hated it. All right, perfect. So now that we finished talking about some new scores that have come out, let's take a step back in time, shall we, people? And talk about some scores that we just want to single out for their awesomeness. Introduce listeners who might not have heard them before into something that they might really enjoy. Now, Luke, you went last for the first round, so I'm going to have you go first for this round. Tell us what you chose.
All right. So I chose the score to everyone's favorite sci-fi movie, The Chronicles of Riddick. So this is a score and movie that I will promote every chance I get, if only because we don't get enough original sci-fi movies, and especially not enough good original sci-fi scores for original sci-fi movies. So The Chronicles of Riddick is, for those who don't know, the sequel to, it's a 2005 film starring Vin Diesel that is a sequel to the 2000 movie called Pitch Black. So Pitch Black was kind of a small sci-fi horror film, low budget, and then Universal was saying, hey, we need something to compete with Star Wars. Let's make a sequel to this, make it huge. Didn't do well, but Graham Revell was on both films and luckily was able to take his theme from the first movie, Pitch Black, and evolve it into this kind of grand sci-fi space opera film score. So there's a lot of stuff to like here. There's a handful of themes led by the Riddick theme that is in both of the films. There's a villain theme for the Necromongers that's kind of rising, very memorable. You hear it multiple times. Some smaller motifs that are clearly meant to be through lines to the inevitable sequels. And there's a lot of fun stuff here, and especially the cue that's called One Speed. I want to single this cue out especially because in today's day and age, I run into a lot of moments where I think, I don't even know what action music would sound like nowadays without just constant ostinatos and like the Zimmer RC sound. And then I go back and listen to One Speed, which is this fantastic action cue with none of that stuff. Original brass layers, there's fantastic string work, stuff is being passed around the orchestra, and it's tremendously exciting. And just a great reminder of what a composer, if they're intent on being unique and really trying to break through and realize that this is their moment to shine and make a name for themselves, what they will accomplish. So I'm a big fan of that. If you like sci-fi film scores and you're wanting one that's not for an established franchise like Star Wars, Star Trek, or in the MCU, your options are limited, and I think that this is one that you should really check out. So I don't know if you guys have thoughts about it. I think, Robert, I recommended this for you for one of your Odysseys towards the very beginning. I'm a big fan.
You did. I remember liking it quite a bit. I'm not a big fan of Revel in general, but I like that score specifically.
Yeah, I don't know if you've ever been able to listen to his score for the Mighty Morphin Power Rangers movie, but it's odd. He has 2 or 3 fantastic scores in his filmography, and nothing else really connects or reaches those levels for me.
Well, I will have to check it out. In fact, I'll add it to my Spotify playlist right now. So up next, we have Vikram. Vikram, what do you have for us today?
Well, I am often when I'm talking to friends who are not as much into film scores, they'll ask me, what are like three scores you'd recommend? And so I've started adding this one to my list because it's a reminder of how a terrible film can still inspire incredible music. And so my old score this week is James Newton Howard's score for The Last Airbender. So this was a film adaptation, a live-action film adaptation by M. Night Shyamalan of a very popular TV show called Avatar: The Last Airbender. When they made the film, they dropped the Avatar bit because it was 1 year after James Cameron's Avatar film. And so the film seemed to make just about every mistake they could. It's regarded sometimes as one of the worst movies ever made, definitely one of the worst movies in Shyamalan's canon. And however, throughout these, for most of his films, he's kept certain collaborators around him, and one of them is his composer, James Newton Howard. And it's this interesting trend I've noticed is that it's a rough correlation, but as Shyamalan's films got worse and worse, James Newton Howard's music for these films kept getting better and better. So, like, around Signs was probably when Shyamalan started to decline. That's when Howard kind of stepped up his game, because then he had Signs, which was excellent. The Village was great. Lady in the Water. And then I think it culminates, I guess the music reaches its peak and Shyamalan reaches his nadir with The Last Airbender. General background, this is a fantasy film rooted in East Asian culture. There are 4 nations. Each one has a control over one of the classical elements. You have the Fire Nation, the Water Nation, the Earth Nation, the Air Nation, I guess. Well, I guess The Last Airbender. I'm not too familiar with the story or the mythology or the characters. But that also speaks to how good James Newton Howard's music is, because even without that background, because I haven't seen the film, I haven't watched the show, without any context, I still have this grasp of the story and the narrative, because he basically has themes for each of those elements, and he, for the most part, ascribes to each of those elements one section of the orchestra. So the Waterbenders and the Water Nation their music's often played in the string section, which makes sense when you hear it. And the Earthbenders are represented with percussion. The Fire Nation has lots of brass melodies, and so like the Airbender gets lots of woodwind stuff. And it's very, and so Howard takes all of he makes this incredible tapestry of themes and motifs, and basically over the course of the score plays around with them, develops them, and it culminates in this final cue called Flow Like Water, where he slowly builds. He starts with the water theme, and he slowly just mixes in each of the other elements, pun intended, and just kind of builds to this huge climax that is very cathartic and satisfying. And I get the impression that Howard was scoring the film that could have been, instead of the actual film that Shyamalan made. And I wish that someone, for some reason or another, would approve making the sequels that were originally planned. Just even though the movie was, by all accounts, terrible, I just wish that Howard had this chance to go back to that playground and do more with this incredible wealth of themes and music.
Yeah, it's one of my favorite fantasy scores of all time. The finale cue, like you had said, is just one of my favorites. I could listen to it all day, every day. What did you guys think?
It's really good. I like it. I mean, I've never seen the film or the anime or any of that, so I don't know if I'm missing something there, but there's just like that little half a star missing for me that I can never remember any of the themes or don't really just have that 100% connection with it. I agree, Flow, the last cue there, Flow Like Water is amazing, and overall it's a really good score. I really enjoyed listening to it, but I just barely misses out on full mark.
Yeah, I absolutely adore the score, which I agree with Cole, though. There's something odd about it because even though I think it's a masterpiece and fantastic, thematically it's very odd with themes that are a little bit nebulous. The Fire Nation never gets really a clearly defined theme. And I think a lot of that has to do with the fact that he was planning on writing multiple sequels that he never got around to, or they never got around to making. But in the meantime, I think it's every cue in that score does something interesting. It builds upon itself. The only shame is that it was released the same year as How to Train Your Dragon, or else I think it would have gotten the full amount of respect that it deserves.
Yep. I disagree. I love all the themes, but it's okay. You guys love it anyway. Cole, what do you got for us?
My throwback score, or whatever you want to call it, is For a Few Dollars More by Ennio Morricone. I think it is fantastic. I think it would probably rival Good, Bad, and Ugly, if not for the fact that it's just not as well known. And part of that is a really unfortunate, recording situation. It's really hard to find a lot of music. There was originally a CD, when they originally pressed it way back when, they could only scrounge up enough music. I think it was like 14 minutes or something. And so they actually combined it with some of the score from the first film, A Fistful of Dollars. And that's how it was released. And it was really hard to find. And you can get more expanded versions, but they have audio like horse noises and gunshots and stuff like that that are layered over top of it because it's just kind of pulled from the film. So it doesn't really have a widely available, pristine version of it. But as far as it goes musically, I think it's fantastic. It's got a catchy main theme with, the classic spaghetti western whistling and guitars and stuff like that. It's got, and one of the things that it did really enter pop culture for a lot of people was the musical Pocket Watch theme that it was actually used, I believe, in the trailer for Dark Tower, which comes out next month. So a lot of people associate that with westerns, and it's just kind of this little music box theme. And so that kind of carried on, but even beyond that, there's lots of classic Morricone tense shootout music and some really sad, mournful strings. One of the last tracks, which it's all in Italian, so I may not have translated it perfectly, but Goodbye Colonel is a really kind of tragic end to the film. Overall, I think it's really enjoyable, and if not for the fact that it's not quite as widely available or widely known, I think a lot of people would have it down as a favorite as well.
Yeah, music doesn't get much better than that. It's so good. It's Last Airbender is up in probably my top 25 of all time, but this is somewhere in there as well. I love it. And the fact that the recording itself sucks is endlessly frustrating. We were talking about this earlier.
Yeah.
Anyone else have any thoughts?
I also quite like the score. I probably disagree that it's when you claim that it's as good as or better than The Good, the Bad, and the Ugly, because there's just so much from that score, from the third Dollars trilogy score, that is just phenomenal. But I agree. I do really like For a Few Dollars More. That pocket watch theme is pretty timeless, and it has a very good theme. I almost feel like when you listen to that theme in sequence, like one after the other, with the theme for A Fistful of Dollars and the theme for The Good, the Bad, and the Ugly, you kind of feel Morricone's progression as he's going from each score to the next. And yeah, I think this is a score that I think you're right. It would get a lot more love if there was a quality recording or re-recording of it.
And I don't necessarily think it's as good as Good, the Bad, and the Ugly, but yeah, I think if there was more of the music available and it kind of got better recording, fully fleshed out the way it was supposed to be, I think it would be up there in that conversation because there's some really good stuff in there.
I've never heard anything from that score, so I'll add it to the list.
How long is your list, Luke?
Oh, you don't even want to know. Multiple Post-it notes long on my desk at work.
Well, you'll get there.
Mine's like a Word doc that I started a few years ago. It's pages and pages.
The problem is when I just, instead of listening on Spotify, I say, oh, it'll be easier if I just buy these scores. And now my wallet is crying out in agony.
I have maxed out the number of albums that I can save on Spotify. I didn't even know you could do that.
See, you learn something new every day.
Yeah. All right. So let's move on to our next little arena. It wouldn't be something with Robert Taylor without an Odyssey. So I figured what we could do is explore the 8 Harry Potter scores and the new Fantastic Beasts and where to find them one score at a time over the course of the next few episodes. The first, of course, is Harry Potter and the Sorcerer's Stone, composed by John Williams. I want to start by giving director Chris Columbus some props. The man can build a fantastic world equal to or even better than any other director out there. It seems like every single decision he made in pre-production of the first film was a smart one. He got a perfect cast. All but one would remain in their iconic roles for all 8 films, and the one who didn't was because he died. The production design of Hogwarts was as close to perfect as one could expect, and he found John Williams knowing that he would craft an iconic theme that would last through the rest of the franchise. Now, when I was re-listening to the score today, I couldn't help but wonder if Williams sort of approached it knowing that the scores would soon leave his hands, and therefore he took almost every major scene, sequence, and location and created a specific theme for it. Themes that don't really seem to interact from cue to cue. We have, the Hedwig theme, the Hogwarts theme, the Quidditch theme. Those are the 3 that do interact, but the others, they're off by themselves, waiting for their reprise and coming sequels. And of course, as we know, they're reprises that would never come. Like Diagon Alley has this very specific theme that's a pretty awesome theme. Platform 9 3/4 has a theme, and so on and so forth. They're not so much cues that build character and build atmosphere. It's like, here's a theme. There's a theme. Everybody's got a theme. They're mostly great. And something else I love about the score, and I'm sure other people are going to use it as a criticism, maybe one of you guys will, Williams specifically seems to be drawing from his previous films as inspiration throughout this score in particular. It reminds you of his past scores in ways that other films might do a little bit, but it seems pretty lathered on here. It's sort of like James Horner, not in notes or technique, but how he approaches his score as parts of this score as part of his entire body of work. You got some Hook, you got some Jurassic Park, you've got some of the magic of Home Alone, and then, of course, lots and lots of Indiana Jones sprinkled throughout. It made me smile. It can be annoying, but for me, I really kind of liked it. Now, for me, the 2 pinnacles of the score are, of course, the iconic Hedwig theme, which the Warner Brothers executives smartly wouldn't allow to be cut from the series series, no matter how much the subsequent composers wanted it to be, and the flying theme itself. I haven't listened to the other scores in a while. I'm looking forward to doing it, but it's such a shame hearing each one of the composers, and even Williams on the third one, try and develop a subsequent flying theme of their own, and having it fail to live up to the greatness of the original Sorcerer's Stone. I love Sorcerer's Stone. It's second only to Prisoner of Azkaban for me in the franchise, and it was a pleasure re-listening to it. I wish that there was a complete score out there so I could see if the new themes that he had developed here, did end up interacting with one another in cues that we haven't listened to. But I don't know. Do you guys love it as much as I do?
Almost. So I saw this film originally when I was 6. So the Harry Potter franchise, or at least the music of it, is alongside Lord of the Rings, Pirates of the Caribbean, and Star Wars, kind of what got me first interested in film music. And so it's difficult to listen to this without a nostalgia filter, especially with Hedwig's theme, which, by the way, is sneaky difficult to hum. Like, there are lots of notes that are easy to get wrong in there. But especially with Hedwig's theme and the friendship theme that you hear most prominently at the end with leaving Hogwarts, that just oozes just this warmth and nostalgia that just kind of overwhelms me when I hear it. And when I think about it, it's kind of sorry, my mouth's falling down the stairs right now. But Williams absolutely nails how lonely Harry is, because that cue that plays at the end when he's saying bye to Hagrid and his friends and getting ready to go home, and it's so bittersweet and tender, and you think, this is for Harry's friends? This is the friendship theme. But it makes sense because as an orphan, he never got to be with his parents. His aunt and uncle were very abusive. He never had any friends growing up, and so in that moment, you feel just how much this place is Harry's first real home. These are his first real friends. This is the best family he's ever had, and now he has to say goodbye for 2 to 3 months, go back to that really awful family. And so I think Williams really just kind of captures how alone Harry feels and how much all of these people mean to him. I guess I kind of digress, but yeah, I do like the score. I'd probably say it's my third favorite. You'll find out which two I love more later on, but that's all I got.
The suspense is killing me. What about you, Luke? Any thoughts?
Yeah, I'm completely with you, Robert. I think this is by far my favorite score of the franchise. I think, I can appreciate the musicality of Prisoner of Azkaban. I understand what Patrick Doyle was trying to go for, but I don't think that there is another film in the franchise that really cuts to the emotional core of the story as much as Williams gets at with this. I think, Vikram, you were right in pointing out how that theme at the end, like for the friendship, how he's pointing out, or how he's bringing up the emotions of that. Oh, look, Harry's a lonely guy, and this is deeper than just, oh, I have some happy friends. Let's have some happy, peppy music. I think that every one of the different cues every one of the cues in this score could almost be a standalone 5-star cue. And yeah, I really wish that these scores would start getting like La La Land or something, expanded editions. As far as it goes with kind of, this definitely is cut from the same cloth as stuff like Hook or from other scores in Williams' past. But unlike Horner, there's never, or Zimmer even, there's never a moment where I have an issue where I'm like, oh, I need to hum this theme from Harry Potter, and I start humming a theme from another one of those scores. I think that they're definitely similar, it's the same style, but these themes are so well fleshed out, and part of it might just be the fact I watched this movie however many times growing up. But each one of the themes in this film are distinct, enjoyable, and I don't feel like they're copies, even if they're from the same style as other stuff that Williams has done. But I think it's a knockout, one of the best scores by far of this millennium.
Cole, bring us home. What do you think?
I have not actually heard this score. I have Hedwig's theme on my iPod, and it's very nice.
All of us were muted, and you missed the audible gasps.
I just feel like, how does one not listen to this score? I don't understand, but you're in for a treat when you do.
I unmuted just so that my audible gasp was audible.
I did notice that I heard a gasp somewhere, so I figured someone must have unmuted. Yeah, I've never watched the films and never dove into the scores, so I am kind of in the dark on this one. Like I said, I've heard Hedwig's theme. It's a very good theme, classic Williams. It pops in my head once in a while. It's good, but I've just never gone into the scores as a whole.
Well, we look forward to the week when you show up and you're like, guys, I need to tell you about something amazing. I finally listened to Sorcerer's Stone. All right.
Yeah, I definitely. Yeah, you should listen to it over this next week and then bring your thoughts back, because I'm almost interested to hear somebody's thoughts on that score, having zero emotional attachment to the film, and just listening to it fresh. Like I do wonder. I wonder how much of my own opinion of the score is based on like other factors.
Right, and I'd agree with you, Luke, because the films and especially the books were such a huge piece of my childhood. And I'm assuming Cole hasn't read the books either. If he hasn't,
no.
Okay. So like, you're going to be flying completely blind going into this, like no knowledge of like the story or the characters or anything.
Is
really.
it weird that I'm a little jealous about the fact that he's going to listen to it for the very first time?
Yeah,
Not weird at all.
I could do that. No.
So, there you go. You've got your homework, Cole. Now, so
Also
this
listen
was
to
our
the second one, so also listen to the second one before next week so you can discuss that too.
Yeah.
So you have 2 hours of work ahead of you, my friend. But it's not going to be work. It's going to be wonderful.
2 hours is the best work possible.
All right. Well, this was our first episode of Spotting Session. I like to think that it went well, but then again, I could be crazy. Up next week, we've got some more of the new hits. We have Brian Tyler's The Mummy coming up, Captain Underpants, maybe the new Transformers, maybe a little Giacchino. We'll find out. And until then, I wish that I had come up with a tagline for the end. Have a great week, guys.
See you guys.
Yeah.
Take care.